Welcome into Rounding the Bases.
Round the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg. It's around the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg.
Hey everybody, welcome into another episode of Rounding the Bases presented by Community America Credit Union. I'm Joe Goldberg, and as always, appreciate the support of Community America Credit Union investing in you and my friends over at Chief of Staff Kansas City. Wherever you are at, what I love so much about them, they're a recruiting firm that believes in people, believes in culture. That's why I partner with them. So if you're curious, if you're looking, if you're searching, give them a shout. You can find them at chiefofstaffkc.com, making connections that matter. My connection today involves, well, I don't really know how to sum it up, but there's certainly a sports tie to it, at least going back to the day. I love the journey of my guests. I love that these journeys never go in a straight line. They never do. That's part of life. I also like the fact that as I am in the midst with this podcast airing in late August, and I know you might be listening to it 5 years down the road, but if you're listening to it as it comes out or somewhere around there, I'm in the midst of covering a playoff baseball chase right now, but football is starting, which means that there's a lot to watch on TV, and certainly where I'm at, when the Royals are playing and we're home, then we go on the road, and generally the Chiefs are playing across the parking lot. So it's just one of those fun times of a year. That's a way for me to get into my guests now, and I'm joined by a dynamic leader with a simple strategy for putting all of your aspirations within reach. His name is Stu Crum, a former college football hero who aimed high to achieve soaring international success. Today, he is an author and executive with an impressive corporate pedigree, but ability alone didn't fuel his drive to the top. It took a playbook that was intentional about living, and now he's ready to share it with the world. Not everyone can change the game, but with the right focus, anyone can win. I haven't told you about that football background yet, but we'll get there in a moment. I'm joined right now from his, I believe, home or office. I'm guessing home.
Yeah, it's my home and office.
In Houston, Texas, both. Stu Crum. Stu, how are you?
Joe, I'm great. Glad to be here, and I just remembered I've got a KC story I've got to tell you in a little bit. So,
all right, we'll get to that. I will make myself a note just so that between the two of us, neither of us forget it. Let's do this before we get to back then, which would be the football days. Let's talk about right now. Let's talk about where you ended up, and then we'll backtrack and cover the journey. Tell us what you're doing right now.
Well, I've over the last 10 years started becoming CEOs for private equity-backed companies. So 18 months ago, I sold a car wash business, which was owned by Goldman Sachs. I was an owner of it as well, and we sold it to Circle K. Just 3 months ago, I started in a tire and service business where we've got 54 locations. Probably 2 years from now, we'll have 100, and we're rolling that up and growing that business. So I have a tendency to go in, take some businesses that are small, build them to big, and hopefully sell them someday, and make a lot of value for the owners and also for the people that are working for us, because there's some great opportunities for the folks that work for us.
So I want to get into all the strategy and that a little bit later in the podcast, because it's not, of course, as simple as it sounds. I don't think anybody would think it is. If they did, everybody would be jumping to do it. Maybe they are trying to jump and do it, and it's not really working for them. There's a lot of strategy. It's not just hey, let's just see what happens here. But
Absolutely.
Let's go back to the beginning, as I believe is the case with most of my guests. You could not have envisioned, say, when you were 18, 19, 20, or even early in your football career, your professional career, that you will be doing this now. What were the aspirations of a young Stu Crum?
You know, I would tell you that I had two aspirations. Professional football was an aspiration. I had the chance to be drafted by the New York Jets. We'll talk about that later. But I always thought I would be a marketing executive with Nike or Adidas or somebody that was sports related, with the hope that someday, I will tell you that the hope someday I would become a CEO, but never envisioned, the opportunities I've had for the last 20 years. And certainly my wife and I have exceeded our expectations and how we've been blessed in our lives. But it's certainly, we're very fortunate, but we've worked very hard as well.
All right, let's talk about the football days, because I have always found, for better or worse, that the position of kicker is, I think, more unique than any position in any sport. And I look, there's no evidence, it's subjective, right? But the reason why I say, and I'm trying to think of other sports where there's a comparable, like a hockey goalie or a soccer goalie, but they're in on almost
Yeah,
every single play, and so they are on an island like a kicker is. I
right.
mean, it is like either you do it or you don't. But a kick, maybe maybe the only closest I could get to it is maybe a closer in baseball, where you come in and do your job. It's what you were supposed to do. We love you. And if you don't, boy, go find somebody else. We don't like you. I'm talking about from a standpoint of fans. And it
Sure.
stands out, right? They either want to talk to you or they don't want anything to do with you. But a kicker is, it's just so unique. How do you view that position?
No, and I do agree it's unique. I will tell you, I'll go back to my early age. As I think most of us never started as kickers. My dream, I was a defensive back, but at 5'7", 165 pounds, I knew I had a fairly limited career beyond that, just pure size, right? Genetics was not in my favor. Now, genetics was in my favor in the fact that I had a very strong leg. But when I think about the days I was in college and the very short time I was in the pros, um, even going to meetings, uh, they're talking game film. They're watching a lot of things. You don't really fit into that conversation. When you're talking about going to the weight room and preseason workouts, we do work out, but our workouts are very, we're not trying to put bulk on. I'm trying to be flexible. And I did put bulk on back when I was playing just because I thought the girls would think I was better looking. But it wasn't for football, by the way. It definitely wasn't for football. So, our whole workout schedule and participation with the team is even limited during football season. But I will tell you, and there's a love-hate relationship. There's a love-hate relationship. Love-hate meaning they love me when I make it, and they don't love me when I don't make it, right? So we're pretty expendable if we don't put three or four in a row constantly in. You see a lot of teams go through three or four kickers in a year. You don't see a lot of teams going through three or four quarterbacks. You definitely don't see a team going through two or three offensive linemen, tackles, guards, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very unique, very pressure filled, and not for the person that can't handle stress. That's for sure.
I I covered a lot of NFL in my early years, Packers, and then St. Louis Rams before.
Mm,
Well, after St. Louis Cardinals, football Cardinals. I think you've got St. Louis background if I
yeah,
if I thought correctly.
grew up in St. Louis. Yep.
And I say the youngest of generations now, maybe Gen Z and younger, say, wait, St. Louis Rams, what's that? And so there is no football, but I was there for the glory years,
Hmm.
the greatest show on turf. First Dick Vermeil, then Mike Martz. I covered both of their Super Bowls. I mean, I covered the debut of Kurt Warner,
Wow.
and so those were magical stories. But they had some very reliable kickers. I remember a guy named Jeff Wilkins, and just seeing the way he would go about his business. He was kind of off on his own, but he seemed to rise to the occasion. He seemed to be able to handle the pressure, and as long as he did that, everybody left him alone, right? And just go and do your job. I'm curious about, and I don't know what a guy like Jeff Wilkins is doing. It's amazing the things that you remember. I think he was Youngstown State. You live with these guys every single day. I don't know what a guy like that is doing nowadays, but I have wondered, people that were in that type of pressure situation, how that translates afterwards to the real world. What lessons did you learn from the pressure of being a kicker?
Yeah, well, I think the greatest lesson you learn is you learn failure, right? I mean, any successful person fails. Now, there's a few people on earth that never admit failure, but the fact of the matter is we all have our ups and downs. And I think my greatest lesson, I mean, if you're a great kicker and you make 28 out of 30 field goals, that's a good year, right? But you missed two field goals, and a lot of people remember those two misses. In particular, they were important misses. Um, and so I think you learn to have a very short memory, a very, very short memory, and you learn to put things behind you and they become less important. And if you can learn to do that, I tell you, as an executive, there's a lot of stress. There's just an amazing amount of stress. And if I woke up every day and looked at my yesterday's performance and it wasn't very good, I might be losing my mind. But I always know there's a tomorrow, and I always know that that the mistake that I might have made to miss that last field goal, and sometimes it's mistakes. Sometimes it's the foot. Sometimes it's the planting. There's a lot of reasons why we miss field goals. Sometimes the snap and hold. But you learn from those, and you learn try not to make that mistake the second time also, right? So, listen, when I wrote a book called Aim for the Uprights, it became a metaphor for my life. Aiming for the uprights became a metaphor for my life, and we can talk about that a little bit. So football, even though I ended my career at 25 years old, a lot of people end at 35. Much of how I became a leader and much of the person I am today started really through those early days in football.
Yeah, and you can never replace that background, right? I mean, it's a part of you for forever. The lessons learned. That's where I think that a little bit of that role is like the relief pitcher, whether it be the closer or whether it be whatever that role is. And really, it's true for everyone now. And I think that we're living in a day and age now where young athletes coming up and executives too are being taught about the importance of the moment, about being present, about forgetting about yesterday, about not worrying yet about tomorrow. That shouldn't be anything new. I think it's probably harder nowadays because of the distractions, because of the cell phone, because of the social media. But I'm telling you, like all these kids that are coming up now, and I know this isn't just a baseball thing, I'm just in that baseball bubble, are so much more well versed on how to handle those moments, but they almost have to be because they have so many more distractions and the mental health and everything that is going on. It's not an easy thing to focus on now. I've said this on this podcast before. I'll keep repeating it because I think it's beneficial for everyone listening. Our current manager for the Royals, who's very cerebral, very structured, very mellow, has no interest in what happened yesterday. He walks around with a T-shirt on most days that has the word "today" on it, and says that just because you went 4 for 4 yesterday has nothing to do with what you're doing today, or 0 for 4 yesterday. Now, to your point, there might be things that you need to work on,
Right.
but the opposition could care less whether you've won 8 games in a row or lost 8 games in a row. They're trying to beat you, and that's it. How long did it take you to? I don't know if we ever master it either. How long did it take you to embrace that mindset? Because I do believe it's a matter of survival for a kicker to have that type of mindset, or you're not going to make it very long.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't by high school. I want to say it probably, I can actually probably point to a time. I think about my sophomore year in college. I kicked a 50-yard field goal to beat Kansas State 9-6, and it was 3 field goals that beat them. The next season, I was playing the second game of the season, playing against University of Arkansas, and I missed a 47-yarder to tie the game with about a minute and a half left in the game. And so I can point to those 2 times where the 50-yarder win the game, people jump upon me. It was the best thing in the world. The 47-yarder, first time I've actually missed a field goal to actually either lose or miss a tie of a game, right? But it was I can point to that time in my life when I realized for about 24 hours I didn't want to come to my dorm room. That's back when athletes lived in dorm rooms, right? And I didn't want to come to my dorm room. And I had a bunch of guys that said, "Stu, listen, there's tomorrow." Um, and we ended up having a great season, by the way, and being All-American that year. I think I made 19 of my next 20 field goals. So it just, it came a point where I had mentally put yesterday behind me and always look for today and tomorrow. And up until that point, I don't think I'd mastered that. So I was 21 years old at the time. And it was really through the caring a relationship I had with friends that helped me get there, because I was a mental midget for about 24 to 36 hours after that game. And I remember specifically not wanting to come outside and do a lot of things. And then it all snapped in and said, "Stu, life's a lot bigger than this. Get over yourself."
It's a hard lesson to learn. And just because you learn it doesn't mean that you always have it. It still could get away from you at times. Look, I don't care whether you are kicking or trying to kick a game-winning field goal in the NFL or in college football on the big stage like you did, or whether you're making a presentation, whether you're a high school kid with a big assignment, or an actor on stage, or a TV broadcaster like me, which for me, I don't, I've done it for so long, I don't even, it's second nature. But we all have those big moments where it just doesn't go our way and you want to go hide. And eventually it passes.
It does.
It just even the worst of them, right? I mean, if you think about some of the biggest gaffes, and thankfully I don't deal in crisis management and all that, but think about celebrities or think about things they've done to get in trouble, the Will Smiths of the world. I don't know. We
Yeah,
can name them on and on and on.
yeah,
Eventually, life goes on for everybody else.
it does.
It's hard to master that. So let's talk about that thought from business, and then we'll talk about the business journey too. I've always believed that sports are so relatable to business, and whether you play them at the highest of levels, and you did, whether you talk about them at the highest of levels like I do. I don't know if I talk about it at a high level, but the stuff I'm talking about is high level. But uh, you know, those lessons in sports, those lessons in managing failure, to me, are so perfect for business and so perfect for life. When did you start to realize? I mean, you wrote a book about it too. Add faith into there as well. When
Right.
did you start to tie it all together?
Probably, actually, um, early in my career, and I used a word a lot in my book, and I use it all the time in business. Intentional. It was when I started becoming intentional about everything I did in life. Intention just means being purposeful, right? I mean, let's kind of put it in. I realized, and I say 25 because that's when I got married. And at 25, and I've been married now, I think it's our 39th. Well, I don't think I know. It's our 39th wedding anniversary this year.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And in our marriage, we were very intentional about the things that we did. When we raised children, we became extremely intentional about the ways we raised our children, right? I actually stopped playing golf for 25 years because I knew that I worked really hard during the week. So on the weekends, I couldn't play golf because I would never see my kids. So I was intentional about that. Um, in business, I've been very intentional about how I lead my team and the things I do and the purpose and distractions I try to take away and the grit that I have in doing that. Um, so I would say I was young enough and that I realized at 25 years old, I've got to be very intentional if I'm going to be successful about everything I do. And by the way, it wasn't just business. I think that's where the penny dropped for me. That's where the aha moment came for me is if I want to be successful in my life, and we can define success by a whole lot of different ways, right? But success for me was great marriage, great kids, good career, and it all started with being intentional in everything I did.
Yeah, that sums it up right there. I love all of that. So you get out of the football world. Let's talk about how football ended first, and
Yeah.
before you went into what I
Well,
would call the quote unquote real world.
yeah. Let's talk about the Kansas City story. So, quick story: drafted by the New York Jets, 1983. Day before training camp starts. The U.S. and by the way, I was a 12th round draft choice. That there's not 12 rounds anymore, right? There's only 7, but they had 12 rounds. So I obviously, wasn't picked in the first 11 rounds, so I wasn't worth that much. Minimum salary in the NFL was 40,000. Jets offered me 40,000 and a $5,000 signing bonus. The United States Football League, you probably remember the United States Football League came around. Donald Trump owned a team, right? I mean, came around, and it was a legit league. I mean, about 40% of the NFL draft choices out of 23 jumped to or out
Doug
of
Flutie, Herschel Walker.
you go on Jim Kelly. I can
Yeah,
go on. Doug Williams was our quarterback, won a Super Bowl with the Washington Redskins, right?
yeah.
I mean, you can go on and on. Great players in this league, but they offered me $80,000 and a $12,000 signing bonus, and I was poor and I was engaged, and it was a lot of money. So I jumped. So let's fast forward. Played for season in the USFL. Didn't want to play in USFL anymore for some personal reasons, which we won't get into this. Thought I was released in the Outlaws. I was then traded from a 12th round draft choice to a 10th round draft choice in 1984 to the Kansas City Chiefs. And the reason why I is Nick Lowry, who was an all-pro kicker, if you remember Nick, had ankle surgery. And so I was brought in to be that kicker for 4 games, just for 4 games. And I knew that. They brought about 10 kickers in. I was unconscious when I came for my tryout. I didn't miss anything. They signed me. I'm now 2 weeks before the regular season starts, and I get a call from the USFL by a guy named Marv Levy. You remember that name?
Buffalo Bills.
Marv was fired 2 years earlier by the Chiefs. He was now the head coach, Chicago Blitz, of the USFL. He said, Stu, I had picked you up in waivers. I just never told you I'd picked you up in waivers. I see that you've signed with the Chiefs, but you can't play with them because you're owned by the Chicago Blitz. And then all of a sudden the league's gotten to literally a legal dispute over this, now 10th round pick, Stu Crum. A week later, now it's probably a week and a half for the first game. I'm released from the Chiefs because I'm owned by the USFL. Now let's fast forward there. I have to sit out 6 months. I go to the Chicago Blitz. They fold. They absolutely fold. Their owner was a guy named Eddie Einhorn. You know that name, owned the Chicago White Sox. He owned the Chicago White Sox, right? He also owned the Chicago Blitz. I end up, so I went an entire 18 months without kicking a football. So horrible story. I ended up suing the Blitz, and I ended up making like $12,000. Wasn't worth anything. And then I went back. So now the Jets own my rights again because that trade was void. I go back in 1985 to the New York Jets. Pat Leahy's our kicker. He was the kicker 2 years earlier, but he had a horrible season. I should have never left. Go back. That was my third year as a pro, only kicking one season and only in the USFL. I never kicked a football in the NFL. And I got cut in training camp. So, wow, what a story, but true story. It's a sad story. It's a great story now. It was a very devastating story back, 40 years ago.
As a young kid, it's hard to process that. You're chasing a dream at that point that very few people have the opportunity, and suddenly things are out of your hand. I'm curious how long it took you to come to peace with that.
I didn't come to peace with it as quick as I should have. I would say probably not until. So I was cut in 1985. I probably came to peace with it in 1988. My first 3 years after being cut, I couldn't watch the NFL because I knew I was as good as those players on the field that were kicking. And if you're an athlete, you should think you are as good as them, right?
Absolutely.
But I knew I was. I mean, statistically, I was as good as in college. I had a strong leg. And so it took me a hard time to come at peace with that part. I was in peace in my life. I want to be clear. It wasn't like I wasn't living my life. It was just I had that desire to play in the NFL. And it was probably 3 years after I was cut that I finally let that dream go and realized that my rest of my career is going to be around business.
So you jumped into business. I don't know, was Texaco the first stop or an early stop?
It was. Texaco was my first stop, and that was in Texaco was, the seventh largest company in the world.
Yeah. So how'd you get in there? And then that obviously was the springboard.
Yeah, very fortunate. When you are an athlete, in particular in Tulsa, I was an academic All-American in Tulsa. I was a good student. I was very involved in the community. It's a very small, it's a private university. Most people don't realize that. Matter of fact, we played KU every year when I was at Tulsa. So we played bigger schools, but we were a very small school. And one of our big boosters happened to be a Texaco executive. And so when I got cut by the Jets, and an article comes out in the paper in August, I got cut, and says the article says, Stu Crum, is there life after football? And I actually within a week received about 4 job offers. One was from Texaco. Went to work for them in a training development program, and it was a great career move for me. I got to learn an awful lot, and here I am 40 some odd years later doing all kinds of things I never dreamed of.
Well, and suddenly you are, I think, traveling the world, and we're talking about convenience stores, gas stations before.
Right.
On and on, Jiffy Lube, Bridgestone. Tell me about that and the evolution. It's obviously a great world to be in. And, when you talked earlier in the podcast about wanting to be a CEO one day, I'm sure you couldn't envision it being there or doing that. But, I mean, what an incredible journey.
Right. I was very fortunate because early on in my career, I had some big opportunities. So at 34 years old, my wife and I and 2 and 4-year-old moved to New Zealand. And my first 2 years, I ran the North Island, about 120 stores. But 2 years later, I was running the country. It's 36 years old, running all of New Zealand for a company called Caltex. It was owned by Chevron Texaco. Fast forward another 5 years after that, I'm running 38 countries in Latin America, half of South America, all of Central America, all the Caribbean. That was pretty good. Bahamas, Bermuda. That was a pretty good gig. But I got all this operational experience in a lot of different countries, and every country had different laws, and I got the opportunity to do that. And then Shell bought Texaco, and that's where the story turns. So Shell ends up buying Texaco, and Shell also buys Jiffy Lube. So I have all this operational experience. They buy Jiffy Lube, and the CEO moves to a new position, resigns, and and I'm plugged to be the CEO president of Jiffy Lube. And that was my first opportunity to run a big company. It was a $2.5 billion company, 2,200 franchise stores. Everybody knows Jiffy Lube, and from there, and that was 16 years ago. I've had, I think, 5 CEO positions or 4 CEO positions since then, and but it was all those little jobs, that worked me, not little jobs, but all those jobs that moved me in to be able and capable of leading a larger organization, and have the confidence of the board doing that kind of stuff.
One of the things that I always feel like for me as a teaching tool, the reason why I love baseball as a teaching tool is more than any other sport. We touched on failure before. You have to be better at managing failure, I believe, in baseball than any other sport,
You
because
do.
if you're failing as a hitter 70% of the time, you are one of the best in baseball, which means you better the typical major leaguers who are the best in the world are managing failure at about 75% of the time. But
Right.
for me, football, I think, because the size of the roster just has more role players than any other sport. And we could take all of the line into there and call them role players because their stats, for the most part, don't show up, right? I mean, we look at quarterbacks, we look at running backs, we look at receivers, we look at sacks, maybe. We look at the kicker stats, right? You're not drafting offensive linemen on your fantasy football team. But my point is that there are so many different pieces in play for a football team. And then if you go look at all the other sports too, start looking at the training staff and the video staff and the on and on and on. There are more, like, if sports fans can get on the inside for a day, and there's so many documentaries and programs that do a good job of that now, the Hard Knocks type of programs that show you what you saw on the inside, what I get to see on the inside. It's its own company, and we're just talking about one division there. We're not talking about finance upstairs,
Right.
human resources, and on and on. How much did that football environment, even being a little bit isolated, what your meetings were with 4 or 5 people, not all of the line, right? You had your punter and your long snapper and your special teams coach, but then everybody comes together for those big meetings. I'm just wondering how that influenced you as you started running bigger companies, seeing all the different assets of it.
Yeah, I tell you, unusual. I bet you the story I'm going to tell you is really unusual, but I was required to actually attend offensive line meetings. And the reason I was, and this is in college, not in professional, but the reason I was is our special teams coach. This is back in 1978, actually my first year in college. There wasn't a special teams coach back then. The special teams coach also coached something else. So our special teams coach happened to be the offensive line coach.
Interesting.
And so he called me Kiki Touchdown. And so I hung out for 4 years, literally, with the offensive linemen. I went to their film sessions. I went to all their meetings. And so I had a chance to see how the offensive line work together, right? And I look at their blocking schemes and everything, because I had to sit there. I was bored, but I had to sit there. Well, then at the end of the day, we always had the team meetings. And my coach, you may know his name, was a guy named John Cooper. And the reason you might know him, John left Tulsa and became head coach for Ohio State for about 13, 14 years.
Yeah.
So John went on to a great career after he left Tulsa. And John, I actually watched the way John motivated the team in these team meetings. I will tell you, though, the very best coach I've ever seen in a team meeting in a session was Lou Holtz. And I know you remember Lou.
Of course.
When I graduated from Tulsa, Lou went from University of Arkansas, University of Minnesota, and one of our coaches went to University of Minnesota and followed him. And I got to sit and watch one of his sessions when practice was done, and I was ready to take the field and battle on after watching Lou Holtz give just a 10-minute pep talk at the end. That inspired me forever. Literally, I will tell you honestly, that one time watching Lou Holtz for 10 minutes after the University of Minnesota football practice inspired me as a leader. I just flew back from Denver, Colorado last night. And I have a new CEO job. I brought my leadership team together. I've only been in this position for about 8 weeks. I brought my leadership team together for the first time, and we met at the Denver airport. And I was that coach. I was motivating that team and getting them to go after the battle and going to battle, and it was fun. And that is identical to what I used to watch 40, 45 years ago when I was in team meetings as a kicker, right? So, but believe you me, Those things you learn from great inspirational coaches you can take into your business life.
Yeah, and now that's so interesting. And now with all of what you're doing, a lot in the world of car washes, and so
Right.
and I know just reading a little bit in our research about the importance of culture, which is something that
Oh,
I speak about all over the country, and that really became important to me when I watched the Kansas City Royals as the Cinderella small market team win the World Series in 2015. They didn't have the best talent in the league. They had talent, but what they did have that was as good as anybody's was culture. And that's when I understood that you can win without a great culture, but it's really hard. But you can do anything with a great culture, and you don't always have to have the best people. It'd be great to have the best people, right? We'd all love to have the talent that the Yankees have, I guess, or let's say in football, the Chiefs. Chiefs don't keep winning without having the right culture
they
in
got a
that
great culture.
building
Yeah.
as well. How important is culture to what you're doing, and how do you go about stressing the importance of that culture,
Yeah.
especially when you're taking over in a new situation?
Yeah. So it's fresh in my mind because literally there were 3 topics we had this week to work through. I locked everybody in a room for 2 days, and first thing we did was we talked about our core values. What are our core values as a company? Second thing we talked about is what is our mission? What do we want to be when we grow up, right? Because without a vision, people perish. So we had to define what that mission was. Third thing we talked about is what is our culture? I'm going to give a plug to a company right now because there's one company in the retail space that stands out to me, Chick-fil-A.
Mhm.
Amazing culture, just an absolutely remarkable culture. And I said to my team, I said, who do you want to be? Who do you guys want to be? It's a company that's 2.5 years old, but I'm the brand new CEO there. And we're $100 million company already, even though we're only 2.5 years old. And I say, guys, what is the culture that you want to have be? Do you want to be the Chick-fil-A of the auto and service space business, or do you want to be the J.C. Penney? I mean, who do you want to be? And I would tell you, culture. And there's a book written about this. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. There's a whole book written about it. But great companies have great cultures. I will tell you, why do the New York Yankees not win more than they do? Because I don't know if they've got a great culture because they always have the highest salary, as do the Mets. Yeah, you don't see those guys win World Series every year, right? There is a lot to do with culture with great athletic teams. There's a lot to do with culture. I think of teams that have superstar players and can never get to the championship.
Yeah.
You got the best player in the league, but why aren't you winning championships?
Yep.
There's a reason why, and it's because sometimes there is no I in team. That's an overused expression, so I'm going to overuse it again. But the best teams I've ever seen, and by the way, the Kansas City Chiefs have an amazing culture.
Mhm.
That's a remarkable culture. Reed does a great job in culture with that program. They got superstars. They got the best quarterback in the NFL, probably. But be that as it may, the best quarterbacks in the NFL don't always win
That's right.
because you got to surround yourself with 21 other guys, actually a bunch more than that, that want to work together as one team. So culture is the ultimate reason why teams win and lose on the field, and businesses win and lose, by the way.
I completely agree with you, and I would. You're talking about that in teams with great players that never win, and we can come up with a million examples.
Oh,
We just had the Los Angeles Angels in town, and they don't have a whole lot of talent. And their one great player is out for the year, Mike Trout. But I mean, they had years of Mike Trout and Albert Pujols, and then Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani, and made it to the playoffs once. They got swept by us in 2015, and it's like you just squandered away having two generational players. There's something else that's not adding up. That's a whole different discussion. Okay. I, I want to wind things down with my 3 baseball theme questions, and then 4 to wrap it up, including a little bit on your book that you referenced earlier. But baseball themed questions. What's the biggest home run that you have hit professionally, whether that be football, whether that be business? You've had a lot of big moments.
can I give 2?
Sure.
Okay. Football, beating our arch rivals, Oklahoma State, national TV with 4 field goals and being named Chevrolet Player of the Game, ending with a 57-yarder. That's my athletic one. Football, business wise, sold my business 18 months ago to Circle K, and we started this thing from nothing, built it to $100+ million company, and it was really fun. It was really, really fun. So those two things for sure.
Lifetime moments, life-changing moments in different ways too, which is really awesome. Okay, there are a lot of swings and misses along the way, whether we want to admit to them or not. I always say we learn from those swings and misses. What's a swing and miss on the journey, and what did you learn from it?
Probably the biggest swing and miss. Um, Boy, that is, I'm trying to think if I go back to football days or if I go to my personal days. Probably biggest swing and miss, to be honest with you, is I was married for only 6 months. Originally married Miss Teen USA, married her for the wrong reasons. She had an affair 6 months into a marriage, and I learned what marriage is all about. Now I'm married for 39 years and found the most wonderful. I was looking for the wrong things at the wrong time, and I realized that, and ended up paying for it very dearly in a lost marriage. So by far, struck out in that one.
Yeah, and then hit a home run afterwards. See,
And
so
then absolutely hit a home run afterwards. Hit a home run plus some. Yeah.
any big mistake in business that you said, all right, that didn't work, but uh,
Yeah.
that won't happen again.
Yeah. Extreme one. When I was in New Zealand, I had a strategy meeting, and there's only four competitors in New Zealand. We actually sat around a table and said, we don't ever have to worry about another competitor coming in. There's only one refinery in the country. There's only enough space for 4 players. Sure enough, 2 years later, a company out of Sydney, Australia, decided to bring product into New Zealand through a barge, and we had a fifth player. So never say never. There's always, keep your eyes open big, because whenever you think that you're the 800-pound gorilla, there's always another one coming behind you. So a big lesson. Fortunately, I was young in my career. I never made that mistake again.
Yeah, there's always something. I always like, this isn't quite the same. I always like when a team's losing or things are bad, and they say it can't get any worse than this. Well, actually, it
Yeah,
could. So
yeah, yeah.
just be ready for anything. Last baseball themed question is small ball. That's what I wrote my book on. To me, it's the little things in baseball. It's the bunts, the sack. Baseball. I mean, you told me that your kid played minor league ball, and
Yep.
and so it to me, it translates to everything. It can translate to the football field. It can translate to business. It's really a culture question. What are the little things behind the scenes that matter to you?
I try to have everybody that around me live by the 6 Ps. Prior proper planning prevents poor performance. Plan, plan, plan. Plan for the unexpected. Plan for the expected. Always be one step ahead of everybody else. So 6 Ps is critical to my success as a leader.
All right, I love that. Let's wrap it up with 4 final questions and begin with the book. You touched on it. Aim for the Uprights, an intentional playbook for success in faith, family, and business. And you mentioned the word intentional before. It's right there in the book. You got the uprights. It kind of, I think it encompasses everything in your life. Tell me about the book.
Just for the title, 1 minute story. 1983 draft. I'm one of the top 3 kickers in the country. New York Giants coach comes out, puts 10 balls on the 30-yard line and says, I want you to kick. He says, right before I step in to kick it, he says, but wait, I don't want you to kick to the goalpost. I want you to hit the right upright. I said, Coach, you're nuts. I'm 40 yards out. The upright's 30 feet high. It's 3 inches diameter. No way. He says, Stu, hit the right upright. First kick, I kicked the ball, actually hit the right upright. I'm not sure who was more surprised, him or us, or me, and my snapper and holder. I went on to kick 9 more. I missed the 9. But he said, why do you think I asked you to do that? I said, Coach, I have no idea. He says, well, listen, I've learned that kids in college aim for the goalpost. And when they're aiming for the goalpost, they miss right or left of it, they've missed the field goal. What we're teaching the NFL is you aim for something very, very small in the middle of that goalpost. If you miss a little bit to the right or left, he says, you made your 3 points. He says, you know what, Stu? You've been aiming for good. I want you to learn to aim for great. Became a metaphor for my life. Literally, that story changed. That story with that coach on that day changed my life. My life changed from just, Stu, don't aim for good in your life. Don't aim for good in marriage. Don't aim for good with your family. Don't aim for good in business. Aim for great. So that's the name of the book, Aim for the Upright, because don't aim for good, aim for great.
All right, I want to encourage everybody to get that. We'll have it in the show notes as well, how to find it. Also, want to let everybody know, for more information about the book, about Stu, everything that he's doing, you can go to stucrum.com. That'll be in our show notes, STUCRUM, stucrum.com. Second question, as we round the bases, let's stick to football for a moment. You mentioned the 57-yarder. 2 parts here. One, was that your favorite moment on the football field? And what is the longest you kicked, whether it be in a game, or I'm guessing there's probably something even longer in practice?
Yeah, a lot longer practice. Longest in games, 58 yards. Longest in practice, 72 yards. wind aided. And there's probably a few kickers like me, right? You get the wind at your back. There's no rush. You kick the ball. 72 yards by far. I used to have a blast in college. We used to kick from the 40-yard line, not from 35 or 30. And so my goal in college was to kick every kickoff through the goalpost. Right. That's what I aimed for. I was aiming to kick through the goalpost. So loved it. That by far, the 57-yarder was more. The 58-yarder was against Southern Illinois University. Not a big game. I think we beat them by 40. Where the 57-yarder was in a huge game on national TV against Oklahoma State, our in-town rivals, and we beat them.
Yeah, and probably the underdog, or at least the smaller school. And
By far underdog. Yes.
I'm picturing them like hoisting you up in the air. I don't know if that all happened, but every now and then the kickers do get some respect.
I've been hoisted before.
Yeah. All right, that's good. That's a unique experience. Third question as we round the bases. You talked about living over in New Zealand. What was your favorite part of living over there? I've never been. It's on the bucket list for sure, but I've never heard a bad thing.
Put it on your bucket list. We lived in Auckland and Wellington. My first job was Auckland, which is like North Island. Wellington is also North Island, one of the most beautiful countries in the world. There's two islands, North and South. South has the Southern Alps, and that's where all those movies were made. All the fjords and beautiful, beautiful mountains. North Island is almost tropical, right? So it's just such a different type of environment. What I love, I love, my favorite part of North Island was a place called the Bay of Islands. 120 islands off of the end of the north of the tip at the top of the island, and we lived there for 4 years. Loved living in New Zealand, and could live there full time if I didn't have 4 grandchildren living in Houston, Texas.
Yeah, that makes it all the more better. Exactly where you're at, the grandkids.
That's right.
We're not quite there yet, but I'm getting those vibes. Not from my kids yet, but just having so many of my friends with grandkids now too, just be around, spoil them, have fun.
Nothing better.
All right, last question to walk off. You've done it all. I don't know that you could ever do it all. Is there anything left on the to-do list for you?
There is a left. Living an intentional life means that you never stop living, right? I'm not sure if I'll work forever, but I'll be living intentionally forever. And right now, if my walk off is being the greatest and the most intentional grandfather that I can be. That is my focus right now. I've got these precious 1, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds that I adore. And I've got great kids that are raising great kids, but I need to be a great grandfather to them. So that's where my focus is. I'm also running a business right now that I probably need to focus on a little bit, which I am as well. But grandkids are by far my intentionality right now.
There's nothing better for sure. Family and living that intentionally. I want to again encourage everybody to check out the website, stucrum.com, stucrum.com. We'll have it in the show notes. The book, Aim for the Uprights, an intentional playbook for success in faith, family, and business. This was really fun, really insightful. Stu, I appreciate you spending time on Rounding the Bases.
Joel, it's been my pleasure, and go Royals. I love the Royals. So let's bring this one home.
I don't mind that.
It's around the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg.